Hey, Chip, how are you?
Hey DJ, I'm doing well. You're in Baja. I'm here in Los Gatos, California, in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, we've
Um,
we've switched places, so you can see by my outfit, your outfit, the glaze on my head.
yeah, no, yeah. I hope you're enjoying the weather. I think, both places are hot. You've got a little more humidity there. We're in the Redwoods. I'm actually officiating a wedding. Some of the people who are listening in or watching know Carrie Henley, and she's actually getting married tomorrow
Oh wow.
to Stephen Cardinelli, and her new name will be Henley Cardinelli. And so yeah, in a beautiful redwood grove, we're going to be doing a ritual, and we need more rituals in modern life, don't we?
Yes, exactly. This is how I actually first found out about you was about 4 years ago. I was listening to an interview you were doing with Jonathan Fields at Good Life Project.
Mhm.
And I had just kind of stepped off from my sabbatical, stepping off from my company that I started. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person is talking exactly of how I'm thinking about things where, here are these moments in life which we don't take time to step back and really, take advantage of. I grew up Catholic. And so this concept of rituals and sacraments over the course of your life was very familiar, but then if you're not religious, it kind of falls off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's say. I mean, I want to dive in, and I want to let me. Can I introduce you first, and then you'll introduce me, and then
Sure.
we'll get into some questions. So, in introducing you, we have it. You and I have we're like mirrors, but we're different ages. You started your company same age I did, at age 26, and you burned the candle at both ends for about 7 years until you were just burned out, which is, I guess, what happens when you burn the candle at both ends. You decided to take a sabbatical, and you wanted your next study to be about sharing wisdom that you picked up from this experience of having some time off. Uh, and since then, you just dove in deep to the deep end, and you've become one of the leading experts in the world on sabbaticals. I've had a chance to read part of your most recent research project on this, and you're writing a book now on your research based upon sabbaticals and advocating for the role of extended leave in a healthy, sustainable world, which in the great recession era that we live in, or great resignation era that we live in, seems like it's a notable thing for many HR departments to actually consider.
Absolutely. No, that's a very flattering intro, especially since I consider you to be a mentor, to think that you kind of see a little bit of yourself in me. Yeah, seeing your background, and obviously you went to business school, you started Joie de Vivre, a boutique hotel company in San Francisco, in the Tenderloin, I think was your first location. I
Thanks.
live
Yeah.
a couple miles away. And then kind of ran that until it seems like you kind of burnt the candle at both edges. And so
Yep.
during that conversation with Jonathan, I remember you talking about how you then took a couple of years off. You did kind of this like festival circuit, and I think about it as you trying to reclaim your actual joie de vivre. And until the co-founder of Airbnb knocked on your door, and you kind of went into this new role, which was this advisor, mentor, and as you came to see it, elder. And so that led to the, penning your book, The Wisdom of Modern Elders, and then creating the physical manifestation of those learnings, Modern Elder Academy, which is where I am calling in from. So if the internet drops, it's your fault, not mine.
Yes. Well, let me just say that one of the things I really enjoyed in reading some of your research on this is just the framing of different kinds of sabbaticals. And just in your research, you showed that there's this idea of sometimes people take a sabbatical for recovery, to recover from something, and I think both of us were in that space, um, or to explore something more deeply, or then to maybe learn a new practice. And in your framing, you have like working holidays, like someone taking a holiday, but maybe using it as a recovery time, maybe thinking of it as a sabbatical. Maybe it's a shorter period of time. Our sabbatical sessions in MEA tend to be shorter, although during COVID, we would have people come for 2 weeks. We had a 2-week minimum back then for sabbatical sessions at MEA. And we had people staying 12 weeks and sometimes longer, 14 weeks. I think one couple stayed because during COVID, they was like, we love it here. We don't want to leave. And I think what they started to realize is they'd moved beyond recovery and they're now into the exploration phase. And so as you framed it, you've got working holidays as the first kind of way to do a sabbatical, which tends to be a shorter one, a very more focused on recovery than anything. Then you've got what I think you call free dives. And a free dive, I want you to talk for a minute about that, and then we can get into some questions for me, because I want to understand free dive. That's one I didn't understand quite as much. And then there's quest. And when you take a quest, you're taking a sabbatical without any intention, clear or conscious intention of where it's going to end up. And I think a lot of us tend to think of that's what a sabbatical is. And it's scary to people because, like, oh my God, I may never come back to work, or, I don't know if I'll have enough money, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think people understand a quest as a sabbatical. But tell us for a minute about free dive. What is it like? What is a free dive as a form of a sabbatical?
Yeah, so I think about the three kind of archetypes of sabbatical takers, and they fit into this working holiday, free dive, and quest. So you have the achiever, and picture like a mountain goat, like on the top of a mountain, right? They want to accomplish something. They've got exactly what they have in mind, whether it's writing a book or doing something like, getting yoga teacher certified or doing the Appalachian Trail. You have the explorer, and think of like a flying squirrel, right? They want to explore the world. They want to see, what's out there. And then you have the seeker, who we kind of think of as like an owl, right? And so the working holiday is really the domain of the achiever. Like the achiever is like, listen, I have this thing that I want to do and I'm going to do it. And, I don't care if it takes all of my sabbatical. I'm not going to rest and recover. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. The free dive is more of someone who's decided to take that kind of healing part at the beginning of sabbatical and then just wants to explore. So, think of this flying squirrel. And the only difference between a free dive and a quest is the quest is adding on to that this concept of hypothesis testing, practice. So like identifying things you want to do and trying them, and coming back and saying like, okay, I thought I wanted to do that, but I don't want to. I'm going to try something else. The quintessential example of that was, we had someone who was like, I've always dreamt of retiring and running an eco resort on an island. That this maybe hits a little close to home, given Modern Element Academy. And they were like, so they wanted to see it. So they took a sabbatical from their consulting firm, and they went and they spent time at an eco lodge in Hawaii, everything from chopping vegetables to kind of understanding reception and operations. And, ultimately they were like, I don't want to do this. And I'm really glad that I tried it. Because otherwise it becomes like a question, a regret. Right. And so that's how I'd kind of differentiate free dive versus quest. Like, you're not quite in a free dive, you're not like actualizing some of your learnings and feeling comfortable experimenting and moving on to other ones.
Yeah, no, free dive is sort of like the in-between between a achiever and a seeker, in the sense that there's a certain practicality built into it, I guess, a little bit, which could be true for a quest as well. But it feels like there's an element of like, what are the things I could do on a free dive sabbatical that I wouldn't have time to do, or the space to do, or whatever, or maybe the intention to do if I was just taking a 1 week vacation. So, when I was recently interviewed for Maria Shriver's Sunday paper, and in looking over some of my notes for the conversation I had there, I remembered that one of the things I said was, for a sabbatical to really be a sabbatical, there's an element of being able to do things that allow you to live a life that's a little bit less ordinary. Like a normal vacation might be like a normal, ordinary vacation, but the kinds of things you could do on a sabbatical are the kinds of things that, like going to doing a Spanish immersion program, in San Miguel de Allende, which a lot of people do, and but you don't necessarily do that for 3 days or for a long weekend or maybe just even a week. You commit to it for maybe a couple weeks minimum, or walking the Camino de Santiago. Now that's not something you can do on your weekends. I mean, that's a big, usually, month-long commitment. I love doing Vipassana silent meditation retreats. And what I've learned the hard way is if I'm doing a 1-week silent meditation retreat, like going and kayaking in Loreto Bay in the Sea of Cortez in Baja, and I'm going to actually go and do a 1-week silent retreat, hiking and camping and kayaking between islands. And if I'm bookending that with finishing work on the day before I start that, and then going back to work the day after I finish it, oh man, I've gotten it wrong, because I haven't really created the space to allow it to have the ritual around it, and so I think sabbaticals often require a little bit of space. And I have a daily blog that I think you know about and you've written for it, called Wisdom Well. And I wrote a blog post last week, talented people need empty space. And it wasn't even about sabbaticals at all, but in retrospect, it really was, because it was like, if you're a person with talent, whether that's creative talent or, whatever kind of talent you have, having some empty space allows something to emerge from that empty space.
Yeah, we were talking about this morning, actually. So we were in a facilitated discussion by Kay, who's awesome down here. And we were talking about, Michael Pollan talks about in How to Change Your Mind, are you doing psychedelics because there's a problem that you're trying to solve, like PTSD, depression, or are you doing it for what he calls the betterment of well people? And I think that too often, because most people have something wrong that happens to them that spurs their sabbatical or spurs their time off, we're thinking about it as solving a problem versus just a practice, a regular practice that you do to reinvigorate creativity or to restore your health when you might not even know that you need it. That's like the ultimate vision, I think, for the Sabbatical project and the work I'm working on. Is it's not something that you do when you have totally burnt out. It's not something you wait to do until some tragedy befalls you. I mean, you talked about the Great Resignation. Fortunately, I'm on record writing about this, like the second month of COVID. Like, what will happen here is that people will take this tragedy and it will shake them, and they will reconsider their priorities if they have the privilege to do so. And so I think that's what we saw with the Great Resignation.
So let's dive deeper on that for a moment. And I appreciate the fact that we're just sort of going back and forth. What do you think what have you seen in your research and in your conversations anecdotally about how people are seeing sabbaticals as a result of COVID and the Great Resignation? Do you think this is a tipping point on some level, or is this are we all gonna go back to our hamster wheels and be back to the way it used to be?
It's a great question, and it's obviously very unevenly distributed, like how people experience it and what results they had from it. But I think no matter what you say, and you kind of Freudian slipped into the Great Recession, which everyone's kind of wondering about how that's going to impact everything. Right. No matter what you say about that, like, workers have, at least for a moment, and I would argue it was more of a starting point, have more power in negotiating with employers than ever before. I don't know, back to the kind of union days. The ability for workers to say, hey, you told me that I couldn't work remotely or work from home because I had to take my daughter or something. And it turns out that we did that for 6 to 12 to 18 months and we got things done. And so I think that glimpse of power and empowerment, I think, will lead us to have more humane kind of work-life kind of schedule things. As far as how it informs sabbaticals and extended leave, and I'd love to talk about your experience with sabbatical policies specifically in joie de vivre, is I think that people then see, okay, I got a glimpse of what my life was really like, when the world turned work and life up to 11 and they became completely inseparable. I saw that before they were pretty much inseparable. I just couldn't see it. And now I see that I'm actually operating, above the tachometer, and I need to take some time away. So it's very consistent with our research, where we're just kind of wired to do something the same way unless someone shakes us and makes us do something differently.
Yeah, that is so true. And that's also maybe a little bit of why changing the habitat you're doing it in is important as well, because when we're if we take a sabbatical and try to do it from home, and sometimes that's all we can afford. So let's be clear that not everybody has privilege to be able to go somewhere else. But even if you're going and staying in the backyard cottage of a high school friend you haven't seen in a long time, and you're just going to go and hold away there, the nice thing is to break up the habits, and maybe learn to create some new habits. And one of the beautiful things about doing it in a place you're not familiar with is your brain is more attuned to sort of having the antenna out there. And you were writing me this weekend, and we have some tide pools right not far from MEA, and you saw an octopus in the tide pools, which is that's an amazing sighting, because the tide pools there are not that deep, and it's I think I may have seen one once there, but to be able to just sort of see the world with a new pair of glasses during COVID, that first summer when I had lots of time in Baja in 2020, I created an experiment, 3 hours, 3 days a week, called Spying on the Divine. And the whole premise was I took my dog Jamie, and we go for a 3-hour walk in some part of nature in Baja that I hadn't been in before. So I had the fresh eyes, and it's when you have those fresh eyes, you start to see things, and your brain synapses start to actually fire. And I would often come back from those 3 hours not intended to have some epiphany around MEA or around a book I might be writing or someone I'm mentoring, but I'd come back with this, my brain felt really fresh, and I had a whole lot of new ways of looking at things. And I mean, to me, that is one of the huge benefits of a sabbatical.
Yeah, to those questions about what is it about separation, disconnection, especially being in a exotic or very different place from your routine life, and what is it about the duration? How long does it take? Why is it that everyone who's taken a sabbatical has taken a vacation, and they're saying something profoundly different is happening here? But at what duration? What are the conditions, the necessary conditions to give people that experience? Obviously, if you have a sabbatical policy from your company and your boss has taken it, and you don't sacrifice any pay, you keep your insurance, and no one thinks you're crazy, it's easier to drop into healing and exploration than if you pull the chute on your life and burn the boat, or whatever the metaphor is. So how can we kind of create those conditions to make it more equitable and accessible to everyone? But as an entrepreneur yourself, what were you thinking when you introduced the sabbatical policy at Joie de Vivre?
Yeah, so yes, we have sabbatical sessions at MEA, but my relationship with sabbaticals goes back a long time. So I'm a longtime hospitality person. In fact, I'm literally staying at a hotel that used to be a Joie de Vivre hotel down here in Los Gatos, the Hotel Los Gatos. And what I noticed a few years into being the CEO of this company I'd started, and we had ultimately created 52 boutique hotels, was that it was really sad. The hotel industry doesn't pay all that well. Generally speaking, the vacation policies of hospitality companies are just bare minimum, usually 2 weeks of vacation time. And yet, especially for our San Francisco hotels, we had people coming and staying in our hotels, building friendships with people from Germany or from, Colombia, or from, Singapore. And they'd go off and they'd say to our front desk staff or our managers, come visit us sometime. And I realized that our employees had very little possibility of going and being able to take a trip, around the world to see these people, or, even just doing it across the country. So and I could also see the burnout. This was the 1990s. And so I introduced an idea that what we back then used to call the radical sabbatical. And all salaried people in the company would get a 4-week paid sabbatical. So you're paid 4 weeks beyond your normal vacation time. So normal vacation time might be 3 weeks of vacation. For a lot of people, it was 2 weeks, in the starting, and that would grow up to 3 weeks. So you get your 3 weeks a year, but you also get your 4 weeks every 3 years. So every 3 years we would give a sabbatical. And when I first introduced this idea to our leadership team, the initial reaction was, well, wait a minute, people are going to go take their sabbatical and then come back and say, I'm leaving. And so why would we do that? And I said, well, if people actually come back and feel they want to leave, that actually might be a good thing in the sense that if they're burnt out, or if they're not burnt out, because after 4 weeks of the sabbatical, they're rarely burnt out. But if they've actually had a bit of an epiphany to sort of say, I don't want to do this anymore, I'd rather actually have them move on than actually have them stay and hate it. What we found instead was that 80% of the people who actually did a sabbatical stayed 3 more years to get their next sabbatical. So every 3 years you get a sabbatical. So people would actually, they also started creating some new habits in their life to create a separation. Because the other thing about the hospitality business that's just terrible is it's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because we never close. The hotel never closes. So there's an element that, you can feel a lot of burnout in that kind of environment. So long story short is I loved it. People in our company loved it. We were, as a company, we got exceptionally talented people, but we paid at the 50th percentile. So we did not pay at the 80th percentile. We were not, in essence, bribing people to work with us. Part of what we did is we created a culture that people loved with certain unique kind of perks, like this perk that was part of the reason that people would actually not only join us, but our retention as a company was 5 times longer than for the average hotel company.
It's funny that you say 80%. Here's another thing we have in common. In our research, we found the same number. It wasn't statistically significant, representative, but managers are worried that if they give someone a sabbatical, they'll leave. And I think that that doesn't show up in our data to be true. And B, there is healthy turnover, right? This conception of, I was talking to this person who's in people role at Zappos. Like the idea that you can trap someone there and you're getting good work from them is just that's not true.
Well, it is. It's true in some. It's historically it was true in like fast food, but it's interesting. When I was reading your report, McDonald's, the company McDonald's was the first company to have sabbaticals in the North America or in the US. Well, what's that about? I mean, I can't imagine they were doing it for line level workers, but they were doing it for managers, I guess, huh?
Yep. Yeah, for managers.
That's amazing. I was so surprised when I saw that. So I think for me, that policy, what was sad is after I sold Joie de Vivre, the new people came in and took over. Is like within a year, they'd gotten rid of the sabbatical policy. And, because conventional thinking was, what I said earlier, which is, the people will abuse it. So, I mean, every 3 years was pretty aggressive. That I will admit that was a pretty aggressive policy. But what it really did is it helped a person feel like, you know what, it's not that far away. I mean, when a company has a sabbatical policy every 10 years, like,
yeah, exactly.
Do you have the patience, especially in the world we live in now, where the average length of tenure in a job is maybe 3 years? I think it's probably a 3-year tenure on average if you stayed at least 6 months. But sometimes people turn over quickly. So there's, I would just say, yeah. So I experienced that then at Airbnb when I was with the founders. We worked on a lot of different policies. Again, we're a travel company. So how do we help people travel more? So we create some policies there. And we have been weaving in some sabbatical policies into MEA as well.
Yeah, just the last thing about that sabbatical policy piece is I was speaking with someone from, a prestigious consulting firm that shall go unnamed. And they were saying that, the comparison group, it's not fair to compare like people going on sabbaticals and leaving to just the standard happy employee. And that they're actually seeing an increased trend in what they call silent sabbaticals, which is people taking medical leave. So FMLA. And, when you burn someone out or when someone's addressing a crisis to the point where they have to take emergency medical leave, you're not getting that like preparation you get when you have a sabbatical coming up. You're not getting, the ability to kind of gracefully hand off your jobs and tasks to people around you. There's no certainty about when you're coming back. like that's the comparison group often, not, just a happy, healthy employee that won't take time off. So
yeah.
I mean, before we get to MEA and SabSesh, like I kind of view your time between Joie de Vivre and Airbnb as like a sabbatical. I'm not sure if you do, but
Yeah.
what did you learn on that time that you feel like you couldn't learn while you were working or at different times in your life?
I had a couple years, and I never called it a sabbatical at that time, interestingly enough, but it sort of was. There were two predominant. So in my practical achiever kind of way, there were the two predominant things that I wanted to do during that 2 years. And actually one of them I knew in advance, which was to write a book called Emotional Equations, which was my fourth book. And so having time on a sabbatical allowed me to do that much easier than when I was trying to write books when I was CEO of the company. The other thing was I was fascinated by festivals. So I was on the board of Burning Man. I was a founding board member of Burning Man, not nonprofit. And I was fascinated by festivals around the world. So I decided I wanted to create a website dedicated to the 300 best festivals in the world. And in my sabbatical couple of years, or actually in one particular year, I went to 36 festivals in 16 countries. And when I say festivals, I don't necessarily mean just Burning Man type of festivals or music festivals, but I mean, like sometimes there are religious pilgrimages, like, really solemn, sacred kind of events. And so I loved that. That was not something I could have done during a normal year. But I also spent a little bit more time just in my backyard hammock, listening to Ricky Lee Jones and sort of contemplating what is it I wanted next in my life. And writing a book on emotions was well suited for that, because having a little bit of space allowed myself to feel some emotions that I usually tend to run away from. And then out of the blue, I got the call from the Airbnb guys, and I went and I said, like, I'll give you 8 hours a week. And Brian, the CEO, and I arm wrestled, and he won. So I agreed to 15 hours a week. But within about 3 or 4 weeks, it was 15 hours a day. And that's when I knew my sabbatical was over. I knew my sabbatical was over when I realized I had strapped myself to a rocket ship. And this was, almost 10 years ago. And Airbnb was a tiny little startup, but it was growing fast. And so I'm glad I had that time off, because I had a ton of energy. I was 52 years old, had a ton of energy to throw into something that really required a lot of my attention and energy. And and then I did that for 4 years full time, until I said, hey, nope, I'm going to move to a strategic advisor. I'm going to go move down to Mexico, where I had recently bought a home just off the beach, and I'm going to write my fifth book, Wisdom at Work: The Making of the Modern Elder. And that's when I had my epiphany to sort of say, like, well, why is it that we don't have midlife wisdom schools? Why don't we have a place where people actually go and do workshops around reimagining and repurposing themselves in midlife, speaking quite broadly in terms of midlife? And it could be from your 30s to your 70s. Ultimately, and I'll finish the story. Ultimately, the workshops did well. It became very popular, and MEA has almost 3,000 alumni from 40 countries, and we have 26 regional chapters around the world. But it was when COVID came along that my co-founder, Christine, one of my co-founders, came along and said, we're shut. We're not, like, we have nothing going on here. We actually closed for about 6.5 months. And she said, what if we were to create a sabbatical program down here and call it Sabbatical Sessions, minimum stays of 2 weeks, but on average, people are staying a month or longer. And we have a light programming, and people can sort of have everything that's beautiful about MEA is being on a beachfront campus, an upscale, luxurious campus, 3 meals a day, free drinks, getting to know each other, going out and exploring the area. All of that would be true, but it would be done outdoors, and it would be done all optional. So it didn't have some of the COVID risks that our workshops did, and it became a huge hit overnight.
Yeah, I have reflections on that I want to discuss. But first, kind of going back to a few things you said, like when you talk about this, like here I spent a year traveling to 36 festivals in such and such countries. I kind of view those as the marquee moments, and then the meaningful moments that might not, be a headline. So that the fact that you would mention, I wanted to sit and read, listen to music, in the same sentence, like those are things that are real and actually restore us, but we wouldn't write like a blog post about. So I wanted to highlight that. We were talking about things like that today. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece is, you mentioned that out of the blue, you get a call from Airbnb. Like when we have time poverty versus, abundance of time, like those things can't percolate up and those things can't happen. Why would someone reach out to you if you were, pedal to the metal and, wouldn't take calls and things like that? So I feel like it's not an accident that once you create space, synchronicity happens and things come into them.
Time poverty versus time affluence.
Yeah.
So affluence. I think it's a very interesting term. I love the term time affluence because it's not a way in the United States we often think about affluence. Affluence is about your wealth or your income or your possessions. It's not about your time. And wouldn't it be interesting if we were to popularize the term time affluence a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I was thinking was, you mentioned kind of coming here and writing the book, and I'm hoping that there's still some book energy in this place as I try to write my book here. But I've been thinking about the prospect of sabbaticals serving as a bit of a capstone. So, people kind of finishing one phase of life or one job, right, one segment, and then using that time to kind of wrap things up and talk about your learnings, pull them together. And in the same way that you might send someone an angry letter, it's better to write it and get it out of you and not necessarily send it. You can kind of like produce that, put it out there, and it doesn't have to be a book that you publish like you, but it's kind of out of your brain and you feel like you've finished the learnings.
Oh yeah, there's a great book called The 100-Year Life, and it speaks about the fact that the way we've historically thought of our lives is you have a learn period up till about 20 or 25 when you're learning, and then you have an earn period from 20 to 25 to 60 or 65 when you're making your money, and then you have the adjourn period, the retiring period. And what they said is like, that model's broken. And if you talk to a millennial or a Gen Z about like that, like, what are you talking about? What they talked about is more episodic lives or portfolio lives, where you have this episode in your life, and then to ritualize it, as you say, like you finish with a sabbatical period. And I think there's a lot to be said for that because, our work at MEA around transitions has shown that there are 3 stages to any transition. There's the ending of something, there's the messy middle, and then there's the beginning of something new. And we don't do a very good job of the ending ritual. And if you do a great job of the ending ritual, you often make it through the messy middle, the liminal period, when you're sort of in between two things, often feeling awkward, but also full of possibility. That period can actually go much more smoothly if you've ended something properly. I want to actually call out Diego, who actually put a message here, which I just want to say, I totally agree with you, Diego. Diego said in the notes, he said a few things in the notes, but one of the things he talked about is isn't it interesting that people are coming to Mexico for their sabbaticals, and then the Mexican way of operating is it's a 6-day work week. A lot of people in the US and other places don't know. It's a 6-day work week, and people are wedded to their jobs. They don't have a lot of the benefits that you get in other countries like Canada, the US, or Europe. And so it's really, I hear you, Diego. And that's part of the reason why we have in the past shut down MEA for periods of time. Next year, we're planning on shutting down for 5 weeks, partly as a way to help our employees, our workers, to feel like they get a break as well. So totally hear you. Thank you for that reflection.
Yeah, one of the things I hear often is, people will say, well, aren't you just advocating for a more generous vacation policy like they have in Europe? Or isn't this just an American working problem? And because my business was across emerging markets all over the world, like if you think that this is just an American problem, you don't have enough international friends. I mean, China has famously this 996 where you're working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. As you said, Mexico, I was surprised to learn that the workday is 6 weeks here. And so ironically, people can come to the States on sabbatical and experience a sabbatical in a culture where vacation and sabbaticals aren't as valued, and vice versa with Mexico.
Talk for a minute about your sabbatical when you took it after having your burnout period. What did you learn from it?
Oh man. So the first thing I think was that, and this is very common to what we've heard from people in our research interviews, is the things that I was attributing to work, like, oh, I'm stressed out and like this is getting me frustrated and things like that, were really just aspects of myself that I was projecting towards work, right? It reminds me of one of the stories in our interview set where it was a consultant who had a sabbatical and he was doing backcountry ski training in Canada. And he found himself making an Excel spreadsheet, tracking the number of vertical feet per day, tracking where he went to, what he wanted to. And so I think that's a really important learning to say, even if I do switch my job, and this is something that I'm actually worried about in the Great Resignation, you can't solve all these things just by switching to another job. I think if you're not pausing and really trying to integrate, as you said, what the learnings are and then who you are and how you've changed, you're just going to take those issues to the next job. And so being able to witness that in myself was very helpful. And I think also it was a time to kind of grieve. I was grieving, some kind of like health issues and family issues, but I was grieving the fact that the business was no longer serving me, right? It was my dream job. I'd created my dream company. We were bringing access to finance to people, over 1 million people, and a couple $2 billion was given to entrepreneurs in emerging markets based on our company. But the reason that I had gotten into it, it wasn't kind of holding me anymore. And I think as we change, if we don't take a step back to say, I have changed, that's okay. What do I want to do with the next phase? We can have these kind of, moments of friction. And I think finally, I spent a lot of my sabbatical, most of it doing a walking pilgrimage in Japan. So you walk to these 88 Buddhist temples.
Oh my gosh, you've done that. I've always wanted to do that. Tell us more.
Yeah, someone just arrived today. I didn't ask her permission to use her name, so I won't, but let's call her Krista, who did the Camino Santiago, and she wants to do this Shikoku pilgrimage next. So it's on this rural island in Japan that most Japanese folks have never been to. And, it's very different than the Camino. It's you're putting it together yourself. There's a lot of language barriers. You can stay in these ryukon, beautiful kind of Japanese temple places, but the people also build these little huts on the side of the road that you can sleep in. And so you can really do it for almost free. And there are kind of like pilgrims that they spend their entire life, going in this circuit and visiting these temples.
How long is it between locations, between temples?
You'll have some of them that there will be 5 temples inside of a city, and there's 400 yards down the street. And you'll have some where you walk an entire day and you don't get to another temple. So it really tests you. And I mean, so many different ways that become kind of funny in retrospect, but at the time are not funny. Like the end of the pilgrimage is at the beginning, right? It's this very Buddhist, like you end at the beginning. There's no fanfare. You get there, other people are setting off and you're like, oh, like this is it. But on that journey, what I learned was the notion of gratitude. Because you're wearing this get up, you're wearing like a sedge hat and like a white kind of robe and a sash, and you have this stick with a bell on it to remind you to be present. Everyone around you can see that you're going through something difficult. You're doing something that's this kind of time-honored, important thing that folks have done for millennia. And because they know you're doing something difficult, they can give you an orange or buy you a coffee. Or I had people take me in and let me stay at their house when it was raining. And so the concept that we're all kind of undergoing our own difficult battle, but how can you recognize that about other people? And can you instead just be kind to them without needing that kind of symbol?
Heather asked a question about great books on sabbatical, and you have one coming out soon enough. Or what books have you enjoyed? And I'll talk about one myself. Actually, I'll do mine first. This is not a book about sabbaticals, but it's a theory of. It's by Mary Catherine Bateson. So Mary Catherine Bateson is the daughter of Margaret Mead, cultural anthropologist, and Gregory Bateson, famous psychologist. And she wrote a book called Composing, I think it was called Composing a Further Life. She had a book called Composing a Life, and then a second book, I think, Composing a Further Life. The one about the further life was speaking about midlife. And since MEA is a midlife wisdom school, and I'm fascinated by midlife as a topic, I read this book, and what I loved was a quote she had, which was, here's the quote. She said basically something to the effect, we have added a huge amount of longevity in the world. In the US, for example, longevity was 47 years old in the year 1900, and it was 77 in the year 2000. So we have 30 additional years. And what she says is, like, the way we tend to look at people's lives is you have more life being old. So think of like a home, and we have extra life, but all we've done is added 2 bedrooms to the backyard, as if you just have more life at the end of your life. And what she said, it was like really interesting metaphorically. She said, what we really need to do is take out an architectural blueprint and create a midlife atrium. And the midlife atrium is this space in the middle of your home, in the middle of your life, when you have lots of life ahead of you in terms of being, your mind, your body, your ambitions, your sense of purpose. And instead of actually being old longer, you're in midlife longer. And in midlife, what you really need is an atrium. And the atrium is creating the space for reflection and new ideas. And so to me, while the book was not about sabbaticals, Mary Catherine Bateson's book was about how to think of your life like a midlife atrium, such that you can create the sabbatical time to reimagine how you want to live the second half of your life. And let's just do a quick math exercise, which is, if you're at age 54 and you're going to live till age 90, you have half of your adult life still ahead of you if you start counting at age 18. So what about you?
No, absolutely. The concept of an atrium in time reminds me of Rabbi Heschel's book, The Sabbath. They're talking about building cathedrals of time as opposed to like cathedrals of, on earth. So making that like beautiful space for you to kind of revel in and, pay tribute to God or whatever is important to you. Wondering if I have it on my bookshelf here, but I think I would talk about it more categorically. I think that one of the biggest mistakes people make on sabbatical, especially early on, is like driving right into, okay, what am I going to do next? And like reading these nonfiction books and saying like, what's my next thing going to be? Or how do I understand where I am and that kind of thing. I would urge people to read those. Rest by Alex Pang is great. Got Sabbatical behind me. There's a lot of books like that. James Hollis, Misery and Meaning, Middle Passage, talks about middle life. But I would also encourage folks just to read fiction that has no purpose other than being inspirational and beautiful and kind of helping you detox from a productive mindset and get in just the being mindset. Categorically, that's where I would tell people to go. And then as you get more into that experiment and practice section, that's where you get to like the design your lives and how will you measure your lives. And I think that, spending the money to come down to Baja just to see your bookshelf would be worth it, because there's this bookshelf, the likes of which you've never seen at Modern Elder Academy.
It's a library. Yeah, no, I want to talk about it for a second. It's funny. I was just thinking about it myself. I love books. So I'm a bookaholic. And so I have muled about 1,000 books with me over the course of many, many trips down. Never sent any books by FedEx or anything like that. It's just been me muling them down. There's 50 different categories. Each of the 50 categories is based upon a question. Like, how could I incorporate more creativity and play in my life? Or, what is, how can I regenerate myself? Or how do I feel more purposeful? And so all of the books in those sections relate to that. But some of those sections are like, there's not a section on how do I live a sabbatical, but there's actually a whole section on what would it be like to live in Baja. But I think being able to, we have 2 MEA campuses that are going to be opening in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 2024. One of them is a former Catholic retreat center and seminary. And there's a huge chapel that we've taken over. And we're going to have 3 stories of books in this huge chapel. So you can just like literally imagine going to a place where your whole sense of the reason you're there is to just go and read a book for an hour. And if you don't like that one, go back and another one. And while Gregorian chants are happening at the same time. So yeah, books are a beautiful window into creating some space because you cannot, unless you're doing Audible. And it's nice to do an Audible book, but it is, for me, it's wholly different to hold it in my hand because if I'm holding it in my hand, I can't really do something else at the same time. When I'm listening to a book, I can do something else at the same time, and that takes away a little bit of my attention, as well as the spaciousness.
No, exactly. I totally agree with you. The library, sorry, I called it a bookshelf, but the library is very, very impressive. And I remember at the beginning of my sabbatical, and someone mentioned this in the comments, but a lot of times you enter into sabbatical, burnt out. And if you're burnt out, by definition, you don't have the efficacy and ability and energy to plan something. And so I think that can send you in a vicious spiral of I'm wasting my time. I don't have the energy to plan something. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I've got all these books on the shelf. If the only thing that I do on this time off is tackle these books, I'm sure that I will be a changed person at the end of it for the better.
Yeah. I see a question from Mike Runge, who's a part of our alumni in Australia. So Mike, you're up very early in the morning, Australian time. Thank you for being up. He's asking, do you think becoming frail could be thought of and lived as a sabbatical? It's a really interesting question. I mean, I think what I would say, and I really appreciate, Mike, your leadership in our MEA alumni community, talking about this topic about the third act and how when we get frail as we get older, we slow down. And actually part of what a sabbatical is often about is slowing down. And so the beauty of thinking of your frailing era, the era when you're slowing down, and then actually having some spaciousness, some having that time affluence, is for you to actually imagine things that you wouldn't have done when you were more able, physically younger. And whether that's writing or it's painting or it's, literally reading books, whether it's being a mentor to someone online, who's younger than you, and you're doing it based on Zoom. There's a lot of things that people fall into when their body no longer allows them to hang out at the gym or allows them to go running 5 miles a day. And these are things that actually, it's remarkable that there's people who, George W. Bush, not a huge fan of him, but he's painting at this stage in his life. Jimmy Carter, he's very active, but there's a lot of things that he did later in life that, that were on a different pace than what he was like earlier. So yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities there. And I think the next question after that one, the one from Moyne, that one goes to you, my friend, DJ. I think we're getting in. This is serious sabbatical questions.
No, I'm excited. And just to piggyback off your question, Mike, is I think that the opportunity as well is for folks over the course of their life to build in practices so that as the physical pursuits and physical hobbies start to become no longer possible, you've kind of built out other things and passions that you're excited about. So I think taking time to be able to do that.
I have one more thought on that too, DJ, just related to what you said. As we get older, there's like this, there's a movie, The Bucket List, and it's like, there's this whole thing like, okay, well, you have your bucket list. A lot of things that people sometimes have on their bucket lists are all about doing. What if your bucket list was about being? I mean, and when I say that, what is it? What are some being activities? What would it be like to actually learn how to meditate 30 minutes a day or go on a silent meditation retreat? I mean, what are some things that are being activities or being ways of being that actually are the things that you would do in your later life as your bucket list? Not doing bucket list, but a being bucket list. Okay, back to you about indigenous wisdom.
This is great. And I definitely have way more to learn on this than I have to answer. So how is a sabbatical different from an indigenous wisdom tradition's vision quest? So one of the premises of my book is that we have these kind of like lost rituals from different cultures, communities, countries. And I think from my basic understanding of the vision quest is it is, you know, akin to communion or confirmation in the Catholic Church, where you're basically saying like, okay, you're transferring into adulthood, or if it's happening at another time in your life, you're taking a step back from like reality in the concrete world to go on more of a spiritual quest. And so, you know, I would love to learn more about this potentially from you. And, you know, as I do more reading, I'm very excited about it. It's difficult, you know, to think about how do we borrow terms and concepts like that, but not, you know, be appropriating, you know, different like cultures and be kind of like learning and appreciating them. So I'm excited.
I think from my experience, and again, it's like you, I'm only observing this. It's not part of my indigenous culture, my life. But what I can say is that my experience working with Native American people, especially in New Mexico, where we have our campus, is there's an element of a vision quest is really about learning to observe that which is beyond yourself. How do you make yourself available to awe? And in fact, I think that is really what many of us need to do in our sabbaticals, is to make ourselves available to awe. Awe is not something you do. It's not something you put in your calendar. And yet when you actually find yourself in nature, and you find the connection between nature and spirituality, there's such an opportunity for awe to be infused in your life. And for yourself to see that you're such a small speck amongst the bigger universe. And I really appreciate indigenous wisdom in terms of helping us to see with a vision quest our small place in the world, but also our important place in the world in terms of how do we help the world be a better place. So I know we're running out short on time, but oh, look at that, Kay. The bucket list goes to the jewel box list. Oh, you're good. And then you got Diego with this question. How would you answer that question about advice on sabbaticals for parents?
So I think that some of the absolutely most inspirational stories that I've heard are from parents. You know, I think of the primary caregiver and the primary earner not having to be able to spend enough time to really know their kids, just seeing their kids as a bunch of errands and responsibilities and things to do. Whereas if you take a step back and can, you know, spend 6 months in an RV, you know, teaching and learning, you really start to get to know your kids' personalities. Just really interesting, great transformative stories. And also, it's way more difficult to take a sabbatical with kids and family than it is, you know, as an individual person to go and travel. So from my experience, it is transformational to that kid's life. A lot of people who feel permission to take sabbaticals observed it from their parents, whether their parents were professors and they lived abroad, or they saw their parents kind of that took them on a sabbatical. So I think you're not only doing a good thing for yourself to get to know your family more, you're passing that gift along for your kids to give them permission to do that in the future.
Let's take one more question from Sally, and then I'd love to come back to that question because I have a Jeff Hamui story about sabbaticals. So Sally asks, how might I use the experience of a sabbatical as I transition into retiring from my big job into my next phase? I have been working in mental health all my life, and I want to move into other forms of service. You just described, Sally, exactly what we do at MEA. I mean, people often come to MEA exactly with what you're talking about. They know they want to navigate a midlife transition, whether it's a divorce, their parents passing away, a career move, empty nest, etc. And I think it's so important. I go back to the 3 stages of transitions. So important to be able to say there's a ritual ending. Like the process of saying goodbye to something is really important, because and so for your big job that you've been doing a long time and you know you don't want to do it anymore, how do you ritualize that? You might ritualize it with the people you work with, or you might ritualize it with your friends or family. But ritualizing it in a way that feels deep and meaningful to you will allow you to put it behind you so that you can actually be moving forward and looking at the future. So, if you want to know how to do that, feel free to look at our workshops or sabbatical sessions, with our workshops opening up again in October, because it's exactly what we do. There's even a workshop in November from Carrie Hannon, I think it is, called Jumpstart, curating your next chapter. So, but DJ, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, Sally. I mean, I've been here for just 2 weeks, so I'm the new guy on the block. But almost every person that we've talked to is undergoing a similar transition. And so, one thing that I would say is that one thing we see with sabbaticals, if you don't give yourself space in between this big job ending and the next thing, the more similar that next thing will be to the big job, because that's where your network is, that's where you think your skills are. But really, I think with stepping back a little bit, that's where you can see, oh, I can take this skill and jujitsu it into something else, or really what this skill was about is this other thing. Or giving yourself some time we had someone here who just left today who was going back to finish her degree, undergrad, get a master's. And so giving yourself that time and space to explore what else is out there, as Chip was saying, to have that kind of space and time in order to let things bubble up. Chip, I think you muted yourself.
Thank you, Sally.
All right.
Hope to see you down in Baja. You're down there till the end of September?
I am.
Yeah. And our sabbatical sessions go till then. I was going to say, funny, with Diego's question about families, I think it was, Jeff Hamui, one of my co-founders, literally was on sabbatical, choosing to go on sabbatical for 6 months to come to Baja with his family from the Bay Area. And he came and he did the very first workshop we ever did at MEA. It was a beta workshop. And he loved it so much, and we loved him so much that we actually made him, our co-founder. And he's been on the ride now for almost 5 years. So you never know where you're going to end up with your family. He ended up relocating from the Bay Area, from Mill Valley to Mexico, and now he's in Santa Fe part-time and flying here today to be in this wedding tomorrow. So I would just say, as one of the final thoughts is, you've got another question here too. Go for that.
I saw Adam's comment from earlier, just when you were talking about what the impact of the sabbatical the pandemic might be on sabbaticals and time away. I've heard this story a lot, where folks could see what was possible, get out into the world and kind of build up the courage to do the next thing.
So you're there for almost too many more months. Two more months. Wow. What would you change? Like, how would you make sabbatical sessions different at MEA?
So I wrote this guest post. You had asked me to write something, and no one proofread it, or maybe they did and they thought it was great. But I kind of have this line which I feel like seems as though I've drunk the Kool-Aid fully, but I think that what you've architected here during sabbatical sessions specifically is really unique, because it gives you a structure so that you're not just sitting and watching Netflix for 7 days straight. And it integrates things that I kind of talk about with getting out of your mind and into your body, right? So you have daily meditation, movement, Kay's leading dance classes, Teddy's leading yoga classes, but you also have a fair amount of space during the day, and nothing's required, right? And so, they call it kind of pollinating. You can like come in, see if it's serving you right now, and leave. And so I think that using Sab Sesh at the very least for the beginning or end of your sabbatical, if not, extending and spending a fair amount more time here, is great. It checks the box of being in a kind of different place to get your mind kind of spinning. You don't have to worry about meals. There's delicious food. You're moving your body. You have community, folks that are in our discussion group today. We had someone that was 32 and someone that was 72, and all along the spectrum. So this intergenerational learning piece that you talk about in your book, Chip. So I'm still thinking about things that I would change, but it's fantastic so far.
Great. Yeah, I also think one last thought is having 3 meals available to you every day. Now you can go offsite and go eat somewhere else if you want, but having everything there is really beautiful. Partly, I mean, first of all, it's all local, organic, cuisine and really good. But one of the nice things about it is it helps to create some, in a time when you actually want to have some spaciousness, you're not having to worry about like, okay, how am I going to do my food thing? Now you can go do it if you want. You can also, after you've stayed at Sabbaticals, you can go and rent a home or an Airbnb really affordably and do all your own cooking. But there's something nice about having that there and available to you, at least from my perspective.
No, it's a lot of recovered time, especially after the first 2 years of the pandemic, cooking every single meal, eating leftovers every day. So it's been a pleasure.
Well, we've taken up our full hour, and we've had some great questions. I guess we're gonna just say goodbye now, huh?
Awesome. It was a great conversation, Chip. Hope we can do it again soon. And it feels like falling pretty far from grace when you're at your own property and they won't even let you check in early, so you have to take the call in the lobby.
Sorry about the sound.
All right. See you soon. Thanks, everyone. If you have any other questions, put them in the comments. But appreciate you coming.